If the Democrats were in power, what would they do? Well, we know what they would do. What did Obama do? He signed a deal that ensured that that regime would get a nuclear weapon, just not on his watch. So outrageous. Netanyahu came to the United States Congress, he was so concerned about it, and urged the Congress to vote against it. This is one of the reasons the Democrats hate him, because he took on their deal and he took on their president, our president, Obama, and he did it publicly. And this is why they hate Netanyahu, hate him, hate him, hate him. Hello, America. This is Liberty's Voice, and I'm Mark Levin. Welcome to our video podcast. Don't forget to tell your friends they can find us on YouTube and, of course, Rumble, just like you did. We're going to do a deep dive today. I enjoy these deep dives. You know, it's interesting. People and I speak all the time at diners, at grocery stores, and so forth. And one of the things they wonder is, how come you're different in person than you are, say, on radio? Or how come your books are very cerebral and you're sort of more practical and plain spoken on radio and all? That's the nature of my brain, and that's the nature of a lot of people's brains. That is, depending on who you're talking to, you want to communicate with them a certain way. And it's not that you're sitting there trying to figure out how to talk to somebody. It's just the nature of things. And it's the nature of things that I want to talk to you about. One of the reasons I write books, it takes me to places that I otherwise wouldn't be able to go. One of the reasons I'm doing this video podcast is the same reason. And that is, I like to delve into questions of humanity, questions of faith, of God. I think about these things all the time. Perhaps you do in quiet moments as well. It's sort of hard to do that on TV or radio or that sort of thing. And so I do it in books. This book, Liberty and Tyranny, as an example, was the number one conservative book, really the number one conservative book in the last quarter century. Why? Because I delved into what does it mean to be a conservative. And same with my latest book, On Power. But I want to delve specifically into something today, and its application to public policy, specifically war-making, or in this case, I would argue, with around peacemaking. And it's this word prudence. Those of you who have followed me over the years, I use this word prudence all the time. I used it in Liberty and Tyranny when I was talking about foreign policy. Prudence, not ideology. What's ideology? Ideology is a set belief system, and I don't mean one based on values and faith. It is a set belief system on how to respond all the time, no matter the issue, no matter the facts, no matter the circumstances, the same way. I'm not talking about principles that we embrace for all time and apply in different ways. I'm talking about, well, let me give you practical examples. When you look at foreign policy, and you hear people on TV and radio speak this way all the time, and politicians now, they talk about forever wars, isolationism, interventionism, colonialism, imperialism. These are ideologies that are set into action. And ideologies set into action, that's not prudence, that's not wise, that's not self-sustaining. So you hear these things all the time, or when it comes to discussing our country, nationalism, populism. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. That's why I talk about Americanism. What does that mean? Well, I can explain what it means about our Declaration, our Constitution, our judeo-christian belief systems, the Enlightenment, and so forth. What does nationalism mean? Well, if you're a National Socialist, it means Nazism. If you're a nationalist and you just love your country, what does that mean? That means I love my country. Then say, I love my country, I'm a patriot. Because nationalism can also mean you oppose federalism, which is a key part of our Constitution. We don't want an overpowering national government. So what does nationalism mean? So words have meaning. I'm not trying to split hairs. I'm just saying this is very, very important to understanding who we are, who you are as an individual, who we are as a society. One of the words that has been used over and over and over again by our founders, that was used, was virtue. Every leading founder whom you are aware of spoke repeatedly about virtue. Virtue. And they all said the same thing in a different and compelling way. If we the people lose our virtue, there's nothing that they could write, no declaration, no constitution, no law, that would make us virtuous. Nothing. It's interesting, Jefferson and Adams, as they were older, they wrote letters back and forth. Adams more than Jefferson. Adams might write 3-4 letters and Jefferson would respond, not because he was rude or arrogant, but Jefferson was a very busy man. And later in life, he actually broke his right hand, his writing hand, and he wrote a little bit with the left hand. And it's very interesting as I look at these writings, the original documents, you can see the writing has changed. And people used to say, wow, as Jefferson got older, his writing was horrible. No, he broke his right hand and it didn't heal properly. But his brain was incredible. And as he got older, he thought a lot about the Declaration. He wrote the first draft, the Constitution. He was not here for that, but from time to time he gave his opinion, or it was solicited by his best friend Madison. Very interesting. John Adams wrote a lot, and he wrote a lot about virtue. There's a funny story about John Adams. John Adams used to say Plato and the Republic, one of the greatest essays or books ever written. He had never read it. And then later in life he read it and he said, what was I talking about? The Republic under Plato. Because if you read the Republic, as I have, and I wrote about in one of my books, the Republic was essentially authoritarianism. Plato's Republic is not a republic you want to live in. It really wasn't even a republic. Now, Plato's student, he had many, but one of them, his greatest student, was Aristotle. And Aristotle condemned the Republic as he matured and got older in his career and so forth. People don't know this. Aristotle, for a period of time, taught Alexander the Great. I mean, there's so many cool things out there about history. Just so many cool things that aren't taught that people don't know. And I get very excited about it. I really enjoy it, and I like writing about it. But let's get back to this word, virtue, which brings us to another word, prudence. What is prudence? Why is prudence important? I almost never use the word, you might say to yourself. I almost never hear other people using the word, you might say to yourself. And yet, it's one of the most important words ever spoken because of what it represents and what it defines and what it describes. We talk about words all the time. Liberty. In my current book on power, I spent a whole chapter on liberty. What does it mean? What does it mean to certain individuals? You might think it's simple, and yet as I did my research on it, nobody really defines it well. In fact, most people define it by what it's not. Rights. What are rights? Same thing. But this word prudence, it can mean a lot of things. Judgment, wisdom, foresight, reason, and by reason we mean right reason. In other words, you can reason to do something evil, reason to do something criminal, immoral, so forth. Talking about right reason, doing the right things. Discipline, temperance, justice. What does it mean? It means all those things. It means all those things and more. Aristotle wrote about the real main 4 aspects of the character: prudence, fortitude, temperance, and justice. Fortitude is once you go through the process of applying prudence and right reason, you need to act. You don't just sit still. The whole point in thinking these things through is not to, navel gaze. It's to do something, whether it's in your personal life, whether it's in your business, whether it's in your place of worship, whether it's as President of the United States. The whole purpose is to get you somewhere. The thought process. Maybe write a book, maybe give a speech, but more than that. A state of grasping the truth, involving reason, concerned with action about things that are good and bad for a human being. That's the short form definition by Aristotle, who was so crucial to those of us who believe in liberty. Aristotle was very important to the founders of this nation, to the revolutionaries. Now, how do we know that? Because they tell us that. There was a letter, I believe it was in 1825, where somebody inquired of Jefferson. I've touched on this in the past, but I want to address it in a little bit of a different way, and says he's basically accusing Jefferson of plagiarism. These ideas weren't your own. These things you wrote about in the Declaration and you guys talked about, those weren't really your own thoughts. And Jefferson said, who said they were? We stand on the shoulders of others, and others stand on the shoulders of others. That's the nature of one generation from the other, passing on knowledge and experience and learning. And he named a few people, and he said there were many more. He named Aristotle, Cicero, the great Roman senator, Sidney, a great philosopher everybody forgets about because he basically wrote one absolutely brilliant book, but it had an influence. They had contemporaries that were very important to them. Adam Smith was a contemporary. And they also learned from the French Revolution that overlapped the American Revolution. And they realized the French Revolution was a complete disaster as opposed to the American Revolution. Why is that? The American Revolution was not about destroying the society and replacing it with something else. The American Revolution was about the nature of our government, not our society. And they wanted a government that was representative with the consent of the governed. And so they would cite Locke and Montesquieu of the Great Enlightenment period. The French Revolution was about destroying the society and starting all over again, eliminating the society that they lived in. It was a revolution to start over. And it was enormously bloody. They called it the 10 years of terrorism. You had what they called an active guillotine that never stopped. And that was something to be repudiated. And the framers later talked about it, and they repudiated what the French did. You know who else repudiated it? You may have heard of Edmund Burke. Edmund Burke was born in Ireland. He moved to Britain. He became a British citizen, and he became a member of Parliament and was a deep thinker, was a scholar. There's something called the Burkean trusteeship. What's that? Well, what is the job of a representative in Parliament, or in our case, in Congress? What is the job of a representative? Is the job of a representative, this gets all to prudence, is the job of a representative to go to Congress and say, I was elected to do whatever I want to do? Or is the job of a representative to go to Congress and basically poll his constituents or hers, and whatever they want, that representative does? Well, Burke, who was brilliant, and he wrote brilliantly, he said, look, it's both. That is, you have access to different information and more information as a representative than maybe the person down the street. Today we would say intelligence information, maybe foreign policy information. So what Burke said is, you represent the interests of the people you represent, but you apply your own conscience to it. Your own conscience, because after all, they're electing you to represent them, and there are factions, and there are issues of the day. Some run hot, some run cold, sometimes they flip. Take that all into consideration when you're making a decision as a representative. But in the end, you've got to make a decision and then put yourself up for the vote, and the people will decide if you effectively represented them. Now, that gets to the word prudence. Representative government is about prudence. Justice, that is, the judiciary, our legal system, is about prudence. What's right, what's wrong, what's moral, what's immoral. Prudence is a form of wisdom. one word to define the next. It's learned by example and experience. Deliberation of thought. Deliberation of thought. That's why sometimes you have to act very, very quickly, and sometimes that's very prudent under the circumstances. Other times you really got to think things through. Again, prudence. If something requires immediate action or immediate response, the prudent thing is to act, and hopefully you'll act properly, or you'll act righteously, or you'll act well in your best interest and the best interests of society. But deliberation of thought as a government, a prudential government, is very, very important. That's why they set up the Senate, for several reasons, but it includes the fact that, there were state issues. The little states said, wait a minute, if we have purely a House of Representatives based on population, we're going to get screwed. And so they came up with the Senate, a bicameral Congress, and the Senate was to be chosen by the state legislatures, not the popular will of the people. That would be the House. As you know, that was changed in the early part of the 20th century. So the whole point of this is to set up a government that is prudent, that the people are prudent, that the people are elected. Prudence would include separation of powers, where power isn't concentrated in the hands of one person or one body of people, that it's representative, the consent of the governed, so we have our elections, but not mob rule. So a lot of our government exists despite elections, judges, and now we have a bureaucracy. And so they built in all these balances and these checks and did so to promote prudence. Now, there's different types of prudence based on different types of virtue. For instance, a moral virtue. What's a moral virtue? It doesn't mean you have to adhere to one religion or another. A moral virtue means temperance, moderation, fortitude. Make a decision, have the courage to act on it. Then there's intellectual virtue. Well, what is intellectual virtue? That doesn't mean you have to be an egghead or have a PhD or be a lawyer or whatever. A lot of them get degrees and they aren't particularly smart, but what does that mean? Rational, practical, deliberate, thoughtful. So moral virtue, intellectual virtue. There's also practical virtue. What does that mean? Experience is the key aspect of practical virtue. I wrote little notes to myself so I wouldn't forget. And practical virtue could be learning, you're taught. Could be learning by example, like with your parents or somebody who you admire or trust. But mostly your own personal experience. You know what's right and wrong. Whether you choose to pick one course or the other is a different issue. You know through reason what's right and wrong, what's good and evil. Whether you choose to be right or wrong or good or evil is a matter of choice, good choice and bad choice. So this whole idea of prudence, which is linked to virtue, which is linked to wisdom, which is linked to deliberation, it serves your personal interests, and it serves political interests. And by political, I don't mean campaigns, Republican, Democrat. Politico, in the old Greek sense, politico means the society, means the interactions, people each among each other and with others. And so when it comes to issues like foreign policy, like I wrote in my book, Liberty and Tyranny, what is the driving force when you're making a decision about foreign policy? Prudence, judgment, right and wrong, moral prudence, practical prudence, intellectual. All of these come to bear. Foreign policy is not about ideology, as I said earlier. So when you hear people say, I'm sick of the forever wars. The Cold War went on for half a century. It was the Cold War or a hot war. We had a choice. We could militarily confront the Soviet Union, or we could build a situation where we tried to control the Soviet Union and its expansionism through alliances, through things like NATO, the Marshall Plan originally, and that sort of thing. So for those purposes, and that phrase came from Churchill, by the way, when he was visiting the United States, specifically Missouri, and Truman, he talked about an iron curtain that has dropped between Western and Eastern Europe. Now, obviously, we would have preferred, at the end of the war, the integration of what we call East Europe and Western Europe, but it wasn't going to be. And so we had a forever non-shooting war called the Cold War, which came to an end thanks to Ronald Reagan and the defeat of the Soviet Union, not with firing a bullet, outproducing them, strategic defense initiative, which they couldn't keep up with, which would basically change the whole idea of mutually assured destruction. And the Soviets had no way of really defending themselves against missiles. We didn't at the time, but they knew at some point we would. Reagan knew, despite the fact that the left and the media mocked him and called it Star Wars. Foreign policy should not be based on ideology. That's dangerous, as it is in your own life and as it is for a society, for a nation. Let me take a little bit of a sharp turn here. The difference between ideology and philosophy. At least my explanation of the difference. Ideology is really something that's built on somebody's view of how the world should be. Marxism is an ideology. Marxism is an ideology. Political Islam or jihadi Islamism is an ideology. Now, it is incorporated into a religious belief system, but it is an ideology nonetheless. Americanism is not an ideology. Americanism is a philosophy. The difference to me is a philosophy incorporates the whole idea of prudence and virtue and temperance and experience, learning. So a philosophy based on certain principles that allow the individual to become more complete, to use their God-given skills and character, to be motivated, to pursue their interests, and promotes virtuism, prudence, and right reason. Ideology is, I'm against forever wars. I'm an isolationist. We shouldn't be doing this. We shouldn't be doing that. And let's take it to Iran. You're president of the United States. You talked about, we don't want any forever wars like Afghanistan. But I do believe in peace through strength. Peace through strength is a prudential statement. It's a prudential term for a policy that is prudential. I believe in peace, in human beings getting along, but I also know from human experience, both my experience as an individual, watching the world and how it operates, understanding who these enemies are, whether they're fascists or Marxists or whatever they are, and history, modern history and ancient history, that if you want peace, you better be strong, or you'll be enslaved, or you'll be slaughtered, or what have you. Peace through strength. We need to build up our military so we can take on any threat against our society. That's prudential. Now, let's talk about Iran. You have two envoys, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. They meet with the representatives of Khomeini, the dictator, the leader of Iran. And they're there to discuss, among other things, the pursuit of nuclear weapons by that regime. And you know enough about that regime to know it slaughters its own people, It's the biggest funder and promoter of terrorism in the United States and throughout the world. That in fact we've lost over 1,000 Americans, military and civilian, directly and indirectly at the hands of this regime. You know that this regime says over and over again, and your intelligence tells you, that they have as its mission, which they believe comes from God, from Allah, the extinction of the West, starting with the United States. And you see this, you hear what they say, you know what they're doing, and so why are they pursuing nuclear weapons? Because there's some threat against them? There's no threat against them. They're funding Hamas to take out Israel, Hezbollah to take out Israel, and other countries, the Houthis. You see all this? They have a record, they have a history of half a century. They have an ideology that's based in the 7th century. It's primitive, it's barbaric. You can see by the way they treat women in our society, whether these women's rights groups, so-called, like it or not, we put women on a pedestal, and we should. I like to say to my wife, she deserves to be pampered. Whether she cringes about that or not, the fact is, that's what a lot of men think. In other words, women are to be partners, they're to be appreciated, they're to be loved for their intellect, for their beauty, for whatever. They're not required to walk around with their faces covered or treated like chattel or beaten or anything of the sort. And yet that ideology, that's how it treats its women. And other people it treats even worse. Torture, rape, murder, some cases imprisonment, not murder, but it is a horrendous existence. So you send your envoys to negotiate with this regime, and the lead negotiator for the other side, I think the foreign minister, he says to our envoys, in 10 days we can and we will build 11 nuclear weapons. We have 22,000 pounds of nuclear material. Wow. Yeah, what? Yeah, we hid it away. 22,000 pounds, enough for 11 nuclear bombs, and we're going to build them. Oh, and by the way, you're not going to get by negotiation what you couldn't get when you bombed us. We're not giving it to you, and we're not giving it to some third party, as you've suggested in the past. We're keeping it. And then in the last of the 3 meetings, those negotiators hand them a 7-page document, and this was told me by Steve Witkoff on radio, and it's out there for anybody who wants to see it on our sites or hear it. They hand them a document about a research facility they have. They say, oh, that's just a research facility. And yet, as they studied the 7 pages, they saw that they had nuclear material at a 20% level. It goes to a 90%, you can use it for bombs. When under the agreement they had signed that they were still to abide with the Europeans in the UN, they were not supposed to go above 3.67%. That's the cap for the civilian use of this nuclear material. They were 20%. Not only were they at 20%, they were storing it. And so I asked Steve Witkoff, well, what does that mean? Mark, they were storing it because they could go from 20% to 60% in 4 weeks, and to go from 60% to 90%, that is to use it for a nuclear bomb, takes about a week. And he said, so that meant as I was negotiating with them, and Jared was, we went back to the president, and we told, Mr. President, they said they're going to have 11 nuclear bombs in 10 days, and 25, when you look at their material, they didn't really mean to say it, in 6 to 8 weeks. 25 nuclear bombs. And so the president's thinking about this. He said, he's thinking, I've bent over backwards to negotiate with these people. It's the second time we've done this. The first time it failed, and we bombed those facilities in June. And now they're bragging about it. Despite the fact that we bombed those facilities, they're still going at it. They're not going to give it up. What's the prudent thing to do? To pretend you didn't hear everything you were just told? To pretend that they're just bragging about having 10 nuclear bombs or 11 nuclear bombs in 10 days? And that the materials they gave you, we should ignore the fact that they'll have 25 in 2 months? And then you look at the past and history, you're being prudent. You think about not only the behavior of that regime, but a regime that they're very close to, the North Koreans, that did the same thing over a longer period of time. And we even denuclearized South Korea because North Korea promised if we did that, they wouldn't nuclearize. But they lied. And so you're looking at this and you're reading this, and you're also thinking to yourself, if we don't hit them first, they may, as soon as they have a breakout, they may hit us, because that's their ideology. If they're going to kill 50,000 of their own people in a few days, they'll kill 1 million of their own people to hold on, because it's not a regime that exists for the people. Listen to it very carefully. It's important. It's a regime that claims to exist for God and going to do God's will as they interpret it, which is their ideology. And their ideology says, as I discussed, anything and everyone or any group of things are to be obliterated, destroyed, conquered if they stand in the way of this pure political Islamist ideology, of imposing it on Christians and Jews and Buddhists and Hindus and atheists and agnostics and Sikhs and whatever. And you know they're serious about it. Is the prudent thing to say, you know what? I'm not getting us into a forever war. That's ideology. You know what? I campaigned against forever wars, even though this is a twist and a complete fabrication of what the president campaigned on, peace through strength. It's an old Reagan phrase, a Reagan doctrine. And they say that, yeah, that's right. Another misstated ideological point. Or, I've got to go to Congress to get approval, which he does not under the Constitution or even under the War Powers Act. I'm the commander-in-chief. I'm looking at this situation. I've got to make a decision on what I'm going to do under these circumstances. What did Aristotle say about right reason? What did Aristotle say about prudence and wisdom? Deliberation, sometimes it has to be quick. You've got to go with a quick decision, sometimes not. In this case, it was relatively quick, but there was a lead up to the decision, right? The negotiations, the experience with Iran, and 50 years of experience. And so the president applies prudence. I don't think he's sitting there, or most presidents said, let me be prudential and do this. I'm describing what happened. The president uses his prudence, what he's learned, his knowledge, his experience, his understanding of what's taken place and what might take place. And he does the wise thing. He does the wise thing. It's not knee-jerk. He's not shooting from the hip. This is a man who is very reluctant to pull a trigger. He's not trigger happy, but he's concluded through prudence, not ideology, through a basic philosophical principle belief system in the application of prudence, that this is the right thing to do. Now let's look at the people who are attacking him for doing what he did. What was the imminent necessity of doing this, they say? Now, can they possibly mean that when they say that? No. That's called propaganda. Well, okay, why didn't he come to Congress first? Come to Congress first for what? Congress already funded the military. It's funded everything that's out there that's being used. The president is the commander-in-chief under Article 2 of the Constitution. A declaration of war, we know, as we've discussed here ad nauseum, is not the power to make war. The power to make war belongs to a president, Congress has the power to cut off funding if it has the votes to do it, which it doesn't, or Congress has the power not to continue funds when the funding cycle comes up. That's how they ended the Vietnam War. The funding cycle is not up. So what power does Congress have? Congress has the power to act if it chooses to, but these votes on the War Power Acts, this is just drama. Number one, they're not going to pass, but number two, even if they do, the president doesn't even have to honor it. But here's my point. If they were able to succeed with the War Powers Act, they would have the power, according to them, and they don't, to tell the President of the United States, withdraw all of our troops, all of our equipment, withdraw everything right now. Now, that's not prudent, is it? In fact, that's suicidal, isn't it? The regime would have been left with not only its power to rebuild, its power to assert itself, because it still has its secret police and it still has its military. It doesn't have its missiles, it doesn't have its jets, it doesn't have its boats. It still has its military, it still has its infantry. So the regime would effectively still have the power to reconstitute itself and to go at it again with nuclear weapons, maybe 10 years, 20 years, maybe 5 years or 2 years, who knows? That's why people say we need regime change. And what's meant by that is this regime needs to be defeated, like the Nazis were defeated, like Tojo was defeated. They have to be defeated in order so the people there can replace it with something else. And that's important to us prudentially because we want to survive too. And that regime does not want us to survive. So the president makes this decision. So if the Democrats were in power, what would they do? Well, we know what they would do. What did Obama do? He signed a deal that ensured that that regime would get a nuclear weapon, just not on his watch. So outrageous. Netanyahu came to the United States Congress, he was so concerned about it, and urged the Congress to vote against it. This is one of the reasons the Democrats hate him, because he took on their deal and he took on their president, our president, Obama, and he did it publicly. And this is why they hate Netanyahu, hate him. The reason the woke right, the isolationists, the ideologues, the reason they hate Netanyahu is because he's the greatest leader Israel's ever had, and he's defended that country like nobody else could. And when we say he's the Churchill of the Middle East, if not the Churchill of our times, there's a reason for that. Because Churchill, with our support, and the support, believe it or not, of the Russians, defeated Hitler and the axis of evil. Well, Netanyahu has done effectively the same with some obvious differences, but he defeated, these regimes that wanted to wipe out the Israelis. Also us, by the way. Also us, that ideology. So, ideology is formulaic. It's formulaic. It doesn't matter what your knowledge is. It doesn't matter what your experience is. You're going to impose a belief, much like the other side, because it's a belief you have and you're not going to give it up. Forever wars. We basically shouldn't fight any battles, any military operations outside of our own borders. Reagan used to call this, and he was very, very critical of it, Fortress America. He said, how can you have Fortress America when you have nuclear submarines, when you have aircraft carriers, when you have ballistic missiles, when you have nuclear missiles, when you have jet fighters and bombers? What's this Fortress of America stuff? That's suicide. We want to protect America, but we can't just build these invisible walls around the country as if other countries are going to honor it. They're not going to honor it because they're not isolationists, and it's not Fortress China and Fortress Russia and Fortress North Korea. No, it's quite the contrary. So this is why I've always thought understanding the great philosophers opens your eyes and enlightens you, me, to what's going on today. It's very interesting. For the Marxist, and I would say for the left generally, and now for these woke right isolationists, the world begins today. Now, they may try and apply some historical event or some philosopher to what they're doing, but that's not really how they're processing these things. The way they are is, we have a blank slate today. Woodrow Wilson wrote about this. We're not bound by the Declaration just because those men got together in the Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia and wrote this document and declared independence and fought the Revolutionary War. We're not bound by their document. Just like they had a right to write a document, we have a right to write a document. That is our future. And so he was among the first intellectual American Marxists. They called it progressivism. That's their nomenclature. That's what they called themselves. But they were steeped in the teachings of Marx and others related to Marx, and they applied that to the American system, which is why I wrote the book American Marxism. It's an American form of Marxism. It's not pure German Marxism or European Marxism or now Third World Marxism. It uses the freedoms and liberties that we have in this country to destroy our freedoms and liberties that we have in this country. Now, so when you understand that Marxists think this way, the world begins today, we have a clean slate, we look at history as an example of how we can take history and formulate it in a way that advances our agenda. We don't really want to learn from it. We just want to apply it in a certain way. And so sloganeering is important. Manipulation of language is important. Manipulation of people's minds, what they can and cannot study, what they can and cannot learn. We're not interested in free speech and debate. We're interested in this ideology, the greater will of the people. You know, the worker's paradise. We have to destroy what exists, every vestige of it, the relationship of parent to child, this market system, which they then label capitalism. We have to destroy that. We have to destroy the culture. And by all means, we have to destroy the church and the synagogue, the whole thing, because that's mysticism. That's got to be destroyed. No faith. All of these ties to the past must be destroyed. It's an ideology. The reason Marxists, that is communism, applied has killed 100 million people, because it's an ideology that seeks to impose itself on human nature. It's an ideology that seeks to impose itself on the human character. It seeks to change what God created. Man seeks to limit the unique nature of man, the ability to reason, and motivated by self-interest, free will, that sort of thing. It tries to destroy it. And if you don't go along and you're an independent thinker and so forth, you've got to be eliminated. Islamism, same thing. We're imposing an ideology. We're not interested in debating it. We're not interested in knowledge and all this other stuff that Aristotle and Cicero and all these great thinkers thought about, Locke and Montesquieu. Oh, that's quaint. We are going to take control. We're going to impose what's right. Equality, equity, as understood by God, their interpretation of it, or forget about God, the Marxists say, as understood by man right here on earth, and everything else must be smothered. Ideology. If everything's a forever war, that means you can never take military action to protect yourself, because everything might lead to a forever war, whatever that means. And yet, on those occasions when you need to take military action or go to war, if you don't, you'll be in what? Forever slavery. Forever without liberty. So these are phrases that are thrown around, that are thrown out like, oh, you're a racist, so you can't debate issues that are intended to cut off a discussion, the use of knowledge, the use of what you see, prudence. So the president used prudence to enter the war, to create a situation in which we were going to deal with Iran. Prudence, virtue, wisdom, temperance. He used all those things the way you're supposed to. And those who oppose him are running around with slogans, They have absolutely no other avenue on which to deal with the crises that he was dealing with. And so these are ideologues, some of the hard left, Marxists, some because they support the regime, political jihadi Islamists, and some because they're isolationists. And while they claim to be America first, they're not America first. They're a different form of ideologue that we've seen in the 1930s and we see now, which will destroy the United States. So that's our little lesson on prudence and virtue and wisdom as applied to the current situation involving Iran. I hope you enjoyed it. And I hope you'll tell your friends. This is Liberty's Voice, our brand new video podcast. We want to do things a little bit differently here. So each show we may address things in a different way. Some things are more urgent than others. But when I can get down and dirty like we did today, I'm going to do it. So I'll see you next time.